Hello everyone, my name is Vishal Maria and I'm the CEO and founder here at Quantexa. I'm delighted to welcome Rob Fulber, the CEO and President of Moodys. Rob, can you give a bit of background to yourself, sir, and your company today?
Yeah, Vish, we like to think of ourselves as what we call a global integrated risk assessment business, and really, ultimately, we're about empowering organizations to make better decisions around a wider range of risks. And we've got about 13,000 employees across 40 countries. A lot of folks know us, obviously, from the rating agency. In the rating agency, we cover over $70 trillion of rated debt, and we've been helping investors and issuers in the debt capital markets for over a century. But we're increasingly being asked by our customers to help in other areas, and so we really have grown some significant businesses in what I'll call, know your customer or screening and onboarding. That's supported by the world's largest database on companies. We've got a significant business serving banks around things like underwriting and risk management and capital planning. We have a growing business in insurance, supporting underwriting and risk management. And then in investing, and we primarily serve the credit buy side. And then we're integrating into those solutions for our customers data and expertise and insights in areas like credit, ESG, climate, cyber, properties, economics. And again, all of that together is what we think of as integrated risk assessment, and really, like I said, empowering our customers to make better decisions.
Fascinating, Rob, and a fascinating organization. And it's truly impressive to see how Moodys has grown over the years from, as you say, the rating agency, but now to a much more wider breadth of capabilities. And from the outside looking in, I've really seen that both being driven by what you hear from your customers today, but also you see from the market trends, from the analyst research out there, when it comes down to that integrated risk assessment. And I think, from our side here at Quantexa, and even with the partnership with Moodys, we are both seeing those clients come out to market where they want to understand that 360 view of that integrated risk assessment. If that's coming from the cyber side, the risk side, the financial crime side, that ability to bring together those disparate sources and the expertise around that data is truly what clients are looking for today. Rob, how has the importance and understanding and monitoring of those risks in financial services today evolved over the years? So we're seeing this journey and we're sort of living that journey. But what's your experience?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Vish. And if you just kind of step back and think about what our mutual customers are dealing with and have been through, and I think the pandemic only served to reinforce this. But our customers are understanding that risks are more interconnected than ever before. We're seeing all of these interdependencies and derivative impacts of things that are going on, and very complex, right? To understand how all of these relationships around risk do in fact interact. And you mentioned 360-degree view, Vish. That's exactly right. When I talk to our customers, they're trying to get a better understanding of the characteristics, the profile of who they're connecting to. That might be who they're lending to. It might be who they're investing in. It might be who their customers are. It might be who their suppliers are. But they want to have a better view, more informed view of who they're connecting to. And, our customers are dealing with a whole set of risks that have emerged over just the last 10 years. Vish, we used to talk about market credit and operational risks, right? But 10 years ago, there wasn't a big focus on cyber risk. Carbon transition risk wasn't even really a term 10 years ago. And so now our customers are saying, hey, look, I need to understand, not just am I going to get paid back, Can I do business with this organization? Do I want to do business with this organization? How will doing business with this organization impact my sustainable supply chain? And so, our customers are having to understand ESG, the physical risks related to climate change, carbon transition, financial crime, reputation, cyber, supply chain, all of that. And that is leading organizations to want to really connect the dots. In fact, Vish, I was speaking with a customer who was the head of digital transformation at a large bank. They said, when we originate a relationship, we need to know three things. We need to understand, can I do business with this entity? Are they going to pay me back? And do I want to do business with this entity? What's the sustainable profile of that entity? And I need to know it at the time that I originate the customer relationship and through the life of the customer relationship. So we've been adding capabilities, adding data sets, analytics, insights, and then trying to bring those together to serve a wide range of use cases for our customers.
Rob, fantastic. And I must say, I totally and wholeheartedly agree with that assessment there. And even from our view, that can I do business? Will they pay me back? And that third aspect, as you say, should I be doing business? In certain respects, sometimes they will each conflict with one another. So the ability to get those lenses all correct at that view, looking at the risk at a totality perspective. You mentioned a few there, climate being one of those, cyber being another. And as you start looking at new emerging risks, as you say, 10 years ago, maybe cyber wasn't one of those lenses, but it absolutely could be a lens today. The piece around the carbon footprint may not have been a consideration, say 10 years back, but is absolutely at the foresight of many risk decisions today. So that integration, that bringing together, and the principle of running complex analytics as well as some simple analytics becomes more and more important as we go into tomorrow's world. Just touching a bit on that, Rob, you mentioned ESG, we mentioned cyber. Climate change is a prevalent topic today. In some of my boardroom conversations with some of our clients, climate change and how that impacts our clients is a huge topic. I know Moody's has been investing substantially in this area, but I would love to hear from you. How is Moody's working to address climate risk today?
Yeah, Vish, when we talk to folks in the market and talk to our customers, we really, there are two big areas, I think, that people are trying to dimension and understand and quantify. The first of those is the physical impact of climate change. What are the financial consequences to a physical location? Could be a community, it could be a building, to climate change and extreme weather events. That's one. The second is understanding carbon transition. So let me unpack both of those for a moment, Vish. So I think there's certainly an increased awareness and understanding that you really want to understand, again, the physical impacts of climate change. And you think about our customers. So you've got investors who want to understand what that means across their portfolio. You've got financial institutions who now are saying, I need to understand the kind of physical risk from climate change that I have across my portfolio, especially as we're seeing in certain cases, insurance companies deciding not to insure certain kinds of properties. So you've read about insurance companies pulling away from insuring certain coastal properties or properties that may be in the hills of California where there's a heightened wildfire risk. Yet a bank has underwritten a loan over it might be a 10-year loan and has that collateral. So they end up owning that climate risk. And so banks are understanding they've got more climate risk across their portfolios than they did, maybe a decade ago. And regulators are wanting banks to be able to then, do stress testing to look at what will be the impact to their portfolio over a period of time based on a range of climate scenarios. The other thing, Vish, you think about governments. Governments are trying to understand the vulnerability of their communities to changing climate. So what does it mean in terms of water scarcity or heat stress or rising sea levels? And then what kinds of investments do the governments want to make to mitigate those risks and build climate resiliency? And there are going to be trillions of dollars that are going to go into investments to build climate resiliency. So there's a place where we've been investing, and we believe that we can help corporates, banks, and governments to be able to dimension the physical risk of climate change and understand the financial impact. Corporations, another place where companies are saying, now I need to look across my supply chain and understand where I have the risk of a tsunami or a hurricane. And what does that mean if I have a critical supplier that's knocked out? And we've seen what happens when you have severe impacts to supply chain. So that's one, Vish. The second is around carbon transition. And so I saw an Oxford study that said something like 80% of the world's GDP, companies and governments have put out something that looks like a net zero target. That's great, right? The same study estimated something like 20% of those targets were deemed credible. And so now you've got investors and lenders stepping back and saying, okay, an airline or an auto company or a country has put out a net zero target for, say, 2050. What does that mean? What does this company have to do to achieve that net zero target? Well, it's going to have an impact on their business strategy, their business mix, their capital allocation, their research and development programs, right? Things are going to have to change. And the world's got to understand, what does a common decarbonization pathway look like for any given airline in the airline industry? So there's a lot of need in the market. And this is one place where really we think we can play a real role, Vish, is helping the market understand, what does it mean for these companies to be going down the route of these decarbonization plans that they have put in place. So both of those areas are places where we've made significant investments, and we think we have an opportunity to play a meaningful role helping the market to mention all of those.
Now, fascinating again, Rob. And I think looking back at the risks, absolutely, like you say, there's a lot of analysis in that look back. But there's also tomorrow's risk and what is the impact of tomorrow. And also, if these organizations go down the route of their 2050 agenda, what is that process to take them there, as you clearly articulate? But what is some of the defensive as well as the offensive strategies one could be taking in looking in that new world? So you mentioned some of the climate changes. There will be opportunities there that the data will be telling you where to invest, where not to invest, and more importantly, how do you do that in a much more calculated view by bringing in some of that data together? And again, I think that the journey and the partnership I've seen with Moodys, I think you're well placed to understand that view because of the wide view of data you have access to across the organization. Just moving on to the next question there, Rob, and you kind of touched upon it a bit earlier when you looked at that KYC process, and just staying a bit onto that KYC for a wee second. We again are seeing our clients who are moving away from that periodic 1-3-5 review cycles of their customer base based upon a risk assessment and so on that they've done, to much more of a trigger-based, event-based view of risk and then managing that risk at an event. And again, going down that approach, we've seen almost a 40% reduction in alerts which you would have triggered, say, in year one, that you no longer need to review because the system, the controls, the data that you're looking at, it's better managing that. So you're not looking at a client that hasn't changed their risk profile. And actually, the risk you signed off is the risk that they're currently under. And therefore, why are you reviewing them? Which doesn't just impact from an efficiency point of view, but also from a customer satisfaction. You're less wasting people's time in a review. Taking that sort of thesis and that hypothesis and moving down to sort of the climate change and the other areas that you can allow the machine and the best use of data coming together, can not only just look at from the efficiencies, but also from customer lens as well. And I think it's fascinating how you bring that together at Moody's. As a company like Quantexa, where I've been running for around 6 years, if someone told me at the beginning, Vish, you're going to have these 3 big events across the next 6 years, events that would have happened in hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, things such as Brexit to COVID, and obviously the Russia and Ukraine challenges. There are a number of external forces out there today which are coming together, which do impact business today. How do you see that landscape changing? How do you see how companies go to business and better manage their risk in a very, very unpredictable market today, Rob?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Vish. There's all sorts of new kinds of risks that have emerged, and you can't be prepared for all of them. Organizations ultimately have to focus on resiliency. Maybe let's touch on just a couple of the things that are front and center right now. I mean, you mentioned Russia, Ukraine, and that brings up this issue around sanctions, right? And all of a sudden, literally every customer that we have is having to now think about implementing and making sure that they're complying with sanctions. And, I think previously this was a big issue for banks and know your customer, but now it's everybody, right? And, supply chain disruption is another thing that literally, almost every company is dealing with in some way. Originally, it was started with the pandemic, and now we're seeing different kinds of supply chain disruption from what's going on in, as you said, in Russia, Ukraine. So, we're helping our customers around, this sanctions risks. And maybe just to drill down on that for a second, Vish, there's a variety of different kinds of risks that emerge from these sanctions, right? You've got entities on sanctions, and those entities' lists are being updated constantly. Then you've got to understand ownership and control. And not all sanctioned entities are on these sanctioned lists. So you've got to understand the ultimate beneficial ownership and the linkages. Of course, this is where we're doing fascinating work with you all at Quantexa, so that you can comply with the OFAC 50% or EU control rules, right? Then you've got comprehensive sanctions risk, where there may be a sanction placed against a region and all entities in that region. And then, and you touched on this, you've got cautionary kind of self-sanctioning that's going on. So maybe an entity is not on a sanctioned list or connected to a sanctioned entity, but you've decided for whatever reason that you don't want to do business with that entity. And certainly we're seeing that go on in Russia. And so to be able to do that, Vish, there's some pretty important elements that go into, complying with all of this. And you mentioned, trigger and really this idea of perpetual KYC. And I actually think of it's almost a perpetual know who you're connecting to. I mean, that's where this is headed, right? I want to know more in real time about my suppliers, my customers, my lending portfolio, and I want to know where I need to focus my scarce resources, right, in terms of risk. And so you've got data management. That's a big issue just to start with that. Then you got to make sure you understand all these lists and who's on the lists. And, there's been a significant increase in companies that are on these sanctions lists. Then you've got to understand networks. And again, this is where I think we're doing some really interesting work in leveraging Quantexa's capabilities. You all are bringing a lot to our customers around that, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then this idea of perpetual, proactive monitoring, bringing in all this information, providing alerts. Our customers are doing something like 800 million screens a day. It's just constant, perpetual monitoring. An interesting example for you, Vish, just to put this in perspective, we were looking at 3 individuals that had been put on a sanctions list and were associated with 2 banks that then were connected to 42 OFAC linked entities, and ultimately were connected to 194 additional entities that were not on sanctions lists, but are effectively sanctioned by extension due to greater than 50% ownership. That's what our mutual customers are dealing with right now. And then you've got supply chain. I'm happy to talk about that as well. But, it's really interesting when you think about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, and what has that meant for our customers, in terms of being able to comply with all of this.
And you are absolutely spot on, and it's fascinating, Rob, how that example of say a few known entities, and when you double click on that, you suddenly get to 100 entities, and you double click on that, and you look at the interconnections between that. That becomes incredibly resource extensive if you're not using the best use of data, the best use of technology to bring that together. But you will also miss gaps if you don't use the best use of data or technology. So it's a double-edged sword there on the efficiency side as well as the effectiveness side. And if I was to double click on another piece you said, Rob, the impact of sanctions. So the impact of sanctions, if I look, for example, some examples here in the UK where some owners of football clubs which have been sanctioned, and suddenly the football club itself is at high risk. Not high risk from necessarily the connectivity to the actual sanctioned entity, but the sustainability of the organization. And suddenly, it's not just an impact to the individual entity, but if you are looking at a lending process to an entity that's got one or two hops away from a major source of income to that entity, that provides a new level of risk, a new level of undertaking. And I joke around with my few of my colleagues when the pandemic hit. My dear old father at 82 years old did not know what an R rate was. And then suddenly at every 10 p.m. news, he's measuring the R rate. And my dear old mum's doing the same. And the Russia sanctions hit the press at the end of February, early March. And now this is a topical event. It's on our news channels. So-and-so people have now been sanctioned. This is material impact to the way people manage their risk and the way people go to market. And this is not going to change. And you mentioned resilience. Even during the COVID challenges we had over the last 2 years plus, being digital resilient is absolutely fundamental on going into the digital transformation. And I think looking at what we're seeing now and unpacking what we're seeing now, having that resilience and that coverage and that view of data becomes even more important. So Rob, we touched upon a few of the areas that we're partnering, and it's been an absolute fantastic partnership. Your team and their expertise and what they bring around the data and some of those domain knowledge in certain of those areas you've already touched on today has been truly amazing to our partnership, not just to us, but also to our clients and our joint clients we have today. But I would love to hear from you, from the tone at the top. How do you see this partnership evolving, and what benefits does it bring to our joint clients today?
Yeah, and Vish, in some ways, I think we might just be scratching the surface of what we can do for our mutual customers because, and I'll talk about, I'll start here with KYC, but if you think about back to this wider range of risks, and then, you think about, for instance, Moody's and just how much data we have across a range of risks. I mentioned, 70 trillion in rated debt, 400 million plus private companies, ESG scores and climate data on over 140 million companies, 400 million economic time series. We've got over 600 billion data points on residential mortgages and something like 100 trillion catastrophe-linked location data points. So I bet that's got your got your mind spinning. You think about the kinds of things that we're going to be able to do for our joint customers. But maybe just to drill down on KYC for a moment, because obviously that's where we've started. And one of the themes here, Vish, that we're talking about is, the first thing you got to do is you got to know who you're doing business with, and that's actually harder than it sounds, right? I got to know the specific company. I got to know a number of things about that company and the ownership of that company and the people associated with that company, right? And so a very important aspect of that is what you all bring to the table, which is entity resolution. And, Vish, there's probably no better firm in the world at that than you all. And that's why we're so excited to partner with you around that. And look, that might sound mundane to people, right? Hey, I just need to make sure I can match up these entities. Well, that's critically important. And it's a lot harder than it sounds, because you've got to get to a single connected view across companies, because then that allows you, I think what you're able, what with your capability, it allows the customers to start to better understand these relationships and the flows across these relationships. And then, Vish, it's not just your customer, but now it's your customer's customer. And that starts to become very important to things like supply chain. And I think your technology allows customers to be able to do this at a greater scale than ever before. And that's able to take in, as you said, much more data, to be able to think about perpetual KYC, to bring a greater precision to this. Our customers, they want to be more efficient and they want to be more precise. And so, what you all are bringing to the table, and by us partnering together, is really allowing our customers to do that. And Vish, I'm going to give a shameless plug for a podcast with our Alex Pillow and your Jamie Hutton that I was listening to, which is a really interesting listen around all of this if people are interested in it. So, Vish, really excited about what we're bringing to our joint customers around KYC and knowing who you're doing business with. But I think, again, I think we might just be scratching the surface here.
And I do agree, Rob. I think the mission, the vision is endless here. I think it's going to absolutely change the way people have looked at risk management from a defensive perspective. And I come to the offensive way of looking and going to market. I think we are going to arm our clients with a very detailed, relevant view of data that they can trust and make faster decisions better than ever before. And coming back to something you said right at the beginning of today's talk, that integrated risk assessment is fundamental. And with this partnership, and it's not a shameless shout out to the podcast whatsoever, the way the gentleman brought together that vision and how they bring this for KYC as one lens is fantastic. And just to double click on that just a tad more, these are some of the areas of the known areas we're doing. Some of the co-innovation we're looking at in new typologies, new risk assessments, and the actual unknown areas that the power of your data and expertise and the power of our technology and our expertise coming together is pretty exciting. And some of the clients and some of our joint clients we've spoken to where I've talked about this partnership, they're incredibly excited. The power of what we're building together and the co-innovation we're doing can actually be truly game-changing. Just coming to the final part to today's talk, we mentioned the integrated risk assessment from KYC to credit to ESG and connecting everything in between. We mentioned about ESG and sustainability and climate and how we're bringing that into the risk assessment. And we mentioned areas such as cyber and other areas around cyber risk. But just double clicking on this data-centric, intelligent organization, we've created reports on what does that data resilient, data-centric organization look like. But what do you see and what does Moody see in this changing global environment with the new risks? How do you create that data-centric, intelligent organization today?
Yeah, maybe just a few thoughts here. And you've talked about resiliency, Vish, and data resiliency actually is an interesting topic. And as we think about our supply chain in many ways is about data. I talked about how much data we're pulling into our organization. In some cases, we're collecting that ourselves, obviously. In other cases, we're getting that from third parties. And so even we now are having to drill down and better understand the resiliency of our own data supply chain, both our own and our third-party supply chains, because that data and what we do with that data, and then as we provide insights on top of that data, and the data and the insights are powering mission critical risk functions at our customers. So it's critical that this data keep flowing. And so it's interesting as you think about data supply chains, because when you think about Russia and China, for instance, that data is very, very valuable right now, right? Organizations need to understand information about Russian organizations so that they can comply with sanctions, for instance. So you need to be able to keep those data supply chains flowing. What we see in China with increasing restrictions around what you can do with data in China and on Chinese companies makes you as a company like ours that's taking that data and providing insights, you have to think about data supply chains. One of the things, Vish, we hear from our customers frequently is, look, there's such a proliferation of data. And you would think, well, that's great. It's just all this additional data that allows you to make, feed that into your decisions. But our customers frequently say, hey, look, Moodys, what we need from you is help separating the signal from the noise, right? Because, only the most sophisticated organizations in the world are really able to bring all of that data in and synthesize that data and be able to separate signal from noise on their own. And so that's where they're looking to organizations like both of us, right? To be able to help them manage and connect that data and to be able to provide insights so that they can figure out, where do I need to spend my time, either in my credit portfolio or thinking about my supply chain or my customers. So there's a lot of demand, for that from our mutual customers. The last thing I might say, Vish, is we also have been thinking more and more about data distribution and access to the data. So, if you think about what we do, we take in data. We have, in many parts of the firm, we have scorecards and methodologies, and then we create ratings and scores and assessments, and we provide insights. But our customers also, in many cases, they want access to the raw data, the raw material that's coming in. And so we have to think about, how do we get more access for our customers to our data? That may mean in third-party platforms where our customers are making decisions, maybe not in our own platforms, but third-party platforms. And also on platforms like we launched something called a data hub, where we got more and more of our data sets available, and our customers can integrate their data sets and work with that in a cloud-based environment using machine learning tools to be able to gain insights on that combination of data. So there's a lot that's going on here as we think about, what you called kind of a data-centric organization.
Absolutely interesting. And I think you've touched on so many areas there, that data resilience, that supply chain of that data. You're absolutely spot on. Our clients, as much as they are looking for the power of that data, they need to make sure that data is accurate. It needs to be readily available. It needs to be in context so they can make those better and trusted decisions. And I'm totally with you. That understanding that supply and the impact of anything in that supply becomes even more interesting to our clients. And something, our joint partnership absolutely is addressing. That data centricity, though, coming back to what you were saying there, that data centricity, though, is huge for our joint clients. Ensuring in this complicated, fragmented world, and anything we've seen in the last sort of 2-3 years, that fragmentation is not getting tighter, is actually, if anything, getting a bit looser. And so to ensure we can piece together that data from cross geography, cross different silos, cross sectors, becomes huge dimensions in making those better, accurate, trusted decisions. So Rob, I just want to say a huge thank you for taking the time out of your busy day today. It's been a fantastic session with you. I've learned truly actually a lot during this session as well. So thanks again for sharing some of your insights and some of the strategy that the great work you and your team are doing there at Moodys. Thanks again for your time, Rob.
Vish, thanks very much for having me, and we're really excited to continue to work with you all for the benefit of our mutual customers. So I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you today.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.